When you're in a challenging situation, it's really useful to know about a power that you already have. This power is mental freedom. And in this video, we'll look at what that actually is and what the practical benefits are. So to kick off, let me take you for a moment to Star Trek. Because if you've ever watched Star Trek, you'll know that they have a very clever way of transporting people from one place to another. They basically are transmitted by energy, so they'll dematerialize in the transporter room on the ship and materialize on the planet's surface. And of course, when they want to go back to the ship, it's the reverse process. And this, in the different stories in Star Trek, sometimes is very, very useful in getting out of danger, because the party on the planet, perhaps they're getting threatened or they're in a tight spot, and the message to the ship is simply beam me up and get me out of here. And just in the nick of time, they're transferred back to the safety of the ship. Now that dovetails with an experience I had quite recently. I was accompanying somebody in hospital, and you may well know what hospitals are like. They move at their own pace. There's lots of process and procedures, and I found at certain times that I was getting really quite impatient, irritated sometimes, feeling really quite powerless, that there's nothing much that I could do, just simply sit it out and just let it all happen. A bit like feeling a bit of a victim, really. And I noticed that there were times when I wanted to just basically communicate with the ship and say, beam me up, get me out of here. Now, I guess that you've had similar experiences to that, where you're in a situation that you'd not want to be in, you'd rather be somewhere else. And obviously, if you can physically remove yourself, then that's an option. But sometimes that isn't really possible, or even actually what you want. I mean, in my case, I didn't want to actually leave the hospital, because then I wouldn't be any help to the person I was with. So there's a sort of conflict there, or seems like a conflict there. You want to get out, but actually you realise there's a benefit in staying. Now, this is where we can start to think about mental freedom, because you may well have had the experience, almost certainly when you were at school, of perhaps being in a lesson that you were getting bored by, so you sort of drifted into daydreaming. In other words, you allowed your mind to take you somewhere else. Physically, you were still in the classroom, but you were actually experiencing something nicer, something more appealing, something more attractive. And of course, we can do that in adult life too. The thing is that as human beings, we can think anything. We can hold anything in our minds. And that can be for good or bad. In other words, we can take ourselves to a very pleasant memory, or we can think about some future scenario that we find very appealing. But we can do the opposite as well. You know, we can dredge up really unhappy memories, or we can scare ourselves by thinking about the future in a way that is very dark and threatening. So mental freedom, you know, is something that we can use to benefit ourselves, or indeed to make ourselves suffer. So it's good to know about it, and then we can do more of the first thing and avoid more of the second thing. So going back to the hospital for a moment, there I was wanting to be beamed up, beamed out, get me out of here. And what I noticed was that there was a way in which I could become aware of what you might call my consciousness, or my beingness, beyond what I was thinking. Now, another way of saying that is listening beyond the noise of my thinking, or looking beyond what I'm thinking. I mean, after all, as thinking beings, we aren't the thoughts, we are the thinker. we are that consciousness in which the thoughts are happening. And if we can just touch that, if we can just momentarily be aware of that, then it's really helpful, as I'll go on to show you. Another way of saying this, because it can sound a bit highfalutin, but it is very, very practical, and it's almost certainly something that you do every evening, every night when you drift off to sleep. There's that moment where, or moments where you stop giving the thoughts of the day your attention, and you aren't trying to think about something else like you might do in daydreaming. You're just letting your mind quieten down. It's a very natural process, and in fact it's a precursor to sleeping. If you can't really do that, it's very difficult to go to sleep because your mind is very busy, and you probably had times like that too, where you just find the same old thoughts going round and round and you can't go to sleep. But most of the time you can go to sleep because you let that attention lessen, and that means that you're, if you like, going beyond or listening beyond the thinking that you're having. And another way that I've heard it spoken about is becoming present. And I noticed this in the hospital. If I could just for a moment see beyond my own thinking, I was then aware of what was around me in much more detail and much more engaged way than I was before. So I might just notice a caster on a chair, or the way that a particular cable plugged into the wall was hanging, or the curtains that are around the cubicle, the pattern on them. I think things, I mean, you could wonder, well, what's the benefit in this? But the point is that you're more aware of your surroundings. You're not so in your head. You're not so lost in thought. So what's happening is that mentally you're beaming up. You're coming out of your thinking, and you're present. You're more aware of your setting, and that comes with a clarity of mind. You're not so busy in your head, so it means that now you can re-engage with what's going on in terms of the requirements for you to act or behave a certain way or answer questions or whatever it is, whatever the situation is, that you now can engage with it on a much more clear-headed way, and by implication that you will be more effective too, and you won't feel so stressed. So again, using the hospital example, if I'm sitting in the hospital with my friend and I'm feeling very irritated, impatient, powerless, those feelings are quite stressful. They have a certain quality to them, which we're all familiar with. We know what that feels like. But when we go beyond our thinking, when we become aware of the silence beyond the noise, the feeling changes. And the feeling of clarity of mind is a very different feeling. And that's if you like, the guide. When we have that feeling of clarity, we know now that we are going to be able to engage and be more effective in the situation we're in. You know, whether that's sitting in a hospital, in a business meeting, in a family situation, whatever the challenge is, that is going to be true. So I invite you to experiment with this and be willing to consider that you can become aware of your beingness beyond your thinking. Even if it's only momentarily, it will be a very powerful change for you, and it is something that is built in. It's not something you've got to work at. It's just becoming more aware of the existence of it. So happy experimenting, and I'll see you next time.